Now that we have laid a basic foundation of osteology, let's talk about one of the most interesting specialties within anthropology, forensic anthropology. Forensic anthropology is the use of a detailed knowledge of human osteology in a medico-legal context, that is, working with law enforcement, medical examiners, and coroners to aid in death investigations when the remains are too skeletal or fragmented for the medical examiner to autopsy. Forensic anthropology straddles many fields. It is, of course, a specialty of biological anthropology, but it is also an example of applied anthropology, where anthropologists use what they know to solve real-world problems. Lastly, it is also a forensic science because it works with the criminal justice system. An anthropologist who does bioarchaeology uses the same techniques as a forensic anthropologist, but in a non-legal context, for example, on ancient skeletons at archaeological sites. Most forensic anthropologists have PhDs in anthropology and are full-time professors at universities and sometimes colleges. They do their forensic anthropology work, consulting work on the side for a fee. A few are employed full-time at museums or for government agencies. Still fewer make a living in the private sector. Forensic anthropologists usually work within their local criminal justice system, but may also work around the world in human rights investigations involving genocide and massacres. In a death investigation, the forensic anthropologist is tasked with several things with the ultimate goal of identifying who this person was. First, they must decide if the remains are human or not. You would be surprised how many people in law enforcement have been fooled by non-human bones, such as Fido buried in the backyard 15 years ago. If bones are human, forensic anthropologists may assist in their recovery. Once back at the lab and cleaned up, a demographic profile is compiled: age, sex, ancestry, height, weight, pathology, and trauma, which not only may help determine how the person died, but aid in their investigation, and any other potentially identifying traits such as surgical implants, etc. Of course, law enforcement really needs to know how long the person has been dead, or the post-mortem interval, so they know what time frame of missing persons cases they need to compare the demographic profile to. After they narrow down the field, then they may seek dental x-rays or DNA samples from families to make a positive identification. But without the help of the forensic anthropologist, they would not know where to even start. Lastly, the forensic anthropologist writes a report for, usually, the coroner's office, and sometimes are asked to testify in court. Contrary to popular belief, forensic anthropologists have no legal authority to do anything. All they do is observe the bones and report their findings. Now we'll take a brief look at how forensic anthropologists compile the demographic profile. Please understand that these are very brief summaries, and there are many methods and techniques that can be used. The first piece of the profile that needs to be filled in is age, beginning with if the remains belong to an adult or not. The reason this is so important is that children and younger teenagers have yet to develop characteristics in their bones that indicate sex and ancestry. If the bones belong to a subadult, the forensic anthropologist uses various techniques from the skull, dental eruption, and epiphyseal union to come up with an age range. This is possible because the skeleton is still growing and developing, as previously discussed. They should not try to tell what the child's sex or ancestry was. If the bones belong to an adult, the forensic anthropologist turns to methods that involve stages of degeneration of the aging skeleton because it is done growing. Parts of our skeleton that change with age include the pubic symphysis, which is where the coxal bones unite at the front of our pelvis in the pubic region, the auricular surface of the coxal bones, this is where the spine attaches to our hip bones at our lower back, where the rib ends attach to the sternum, and closure of the cranial sutures. Again, the goal is to estimate an age range that can be useful to law enforcement for matching up to missing persons cases. You wouldn't want to have a range so narrow it might exclude possible matches, or so wide it's basically useless. Again, this is just a basic summary, and there's a lot more to it than just this. After estimating an age range, forensic anthropologists may move on to sex and ancestry for adults. The effects of natural and sexual selection on the human species has produced a set of typically masculine and typically feminine characteristics that make determining sex possible. Most accurate and notable are the changes in the female pelvis to accommodate pregnancy and childbirth. Second to the pelvis in accuracy is the skull. Males tend to have more rugged features due to having larger musculature of the face. Also very accurate are sets of metric analysis on various postcranial remains like the arm and leg bones, and some others. While it is always best practice to use multiple measures and indicators of sex from many sources whenever possible, occasionally results will be contradictory and sex cannot be estimated and is instead called ambiguous. Particularly difficult to estimate is the ancestry of an individual based on skeletal elements. The skull usually shows the effects of natural selection and adaptation most prevalently. However, migration and admixture, in the form of gene flow, as well as social and cultural perceptions of quote-unquote race, may confuse the data. For example, consider a missing persons case where a young woman who identified herself as Black or African American has been missing for several years. A set of human remains turns up near the place she was last seen. The consulting forensic anthropologist assesses the bones and concludes that they belong to a woman about the same age as the missing woman, but that the skull appears to belong to a person of Caucasian ancestry. Due to considerable admixture between European and African-descended Americans, it is quite common for a person socially classified as Black to have white or Caucasoid skeletal traits. It is still possible that the remains found belong to the missing woman because of this fact. For this reason and others, estimating ancestry is problematic. That taken into consideration, forensic anthropologists are often asked by law enforcement to give them an idea of what ancestry the decedent was to help match them up with their missing persons cases. A constellation of features of the teeth and skull, such as the shape of the nasal aperture, cheekbones, eye orbits, bite type, etc., are used.